Okay. So, hello everybody. My name is Victoria Romero. I'm a Senior Manager Training and Licensing with IATA. Welcome to this joint IATA ICAO IFALPA webinar, Managing Pilot Training and Licensing during COVID. Before we start the webinar, I just want to go over some of the logistics. So the webinar is recorded and will be made available after the session. You are unmuted due to the number of attendees. Therefore, we would ask you to please post your questions in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. Questions will be answered after the presentations from the three panelists. If we do not have time to answer all your questions, what we will do is we'll prepare a Q&A document, share it with all the attendees after the session. Also, through the session, we will have a few polls. So we would ask you to click on submit after you have selected your answer. So now I will leave the floor to our moderator, Stuart Fox, Director, Flight Operations at IATA. So Stuart, over to you.
Thank you, Victoria. Hello, everybody, and it's great you can attend this virtual forum. I'm the Director of Flight Operations at IATA based in Montreal, leading a team of subject matter experts to support our members across the broad range of operational areas such as training, licensing, technical fuel, airworthiness and maintenance. Prior to joining IATA, I held senior roles in a number of aviation regulators, airlines and aircraft charter operators, having spent 26 years in training and examining of private and commercial pilots. Just to put it in context, really there's been a lot of difficulty in some pilots, operators being able to train their crew due to the restrictions in place due to the COVID outbreak. So looking now at the objectives of the webinar, the first one is during this webinar, we'll look at what has been done to maintain operations in terms of pilot training and licensing. Secondly, what are the challenges and possible solutions for returning to normal operations or some form of normal operations in terms of planning, curriculum, delivering training, transition to line operations, and extension management. During this webinar, we'll hear from the regulator's perspective, from operator's perspective, and from the pilot's perspective. Let me now introduce the three panelists we have. Next slide, please. So our first panelist, Gerda Pastachka, is a technical officer for personal licensing at ICAO. We then have Captain Glenn Finch, Vice Chair for Training and Licensing at IFALPA. Captain Jan Rene, Head of Training and Licensing, Flight Operations IATA. And I now go through the content. Thank you, Victoria. Firstly, we're going to go through the competition guidelines. We're then going to move on to our panel discussion, managing training and licensing during the COVID, role and support, presented initially by ICAO, then IFALPA, then IATA. Then we're going to have a Q&A session. Next slide, please. So competition guidelines. Before we start this webinar, a few words, we'll say a few words about Fordham Wera, our Assistant General Counsel regarding competition laws. Fordham will talk you through the competition law, and then we will then move on to our first panelist after we've had a poll. So over to you, Fordham.
Thank you, Stuart. I hope everyone can hear me. I would just also want to welcome all participants to this important webinar at this critical time for our industry. I will just take a minute or two to remind all participants of our obligation to conduct IATA events in full compliance with competition laws. As a trade association, we are always concerned about competition law, especially at meetings such as this, because as everyone is aware, we bring together groups of competitors. And as you know, in general, most competition laws prohibit competitors from agreeing on issues that they should be competing about. These are things like prices, charges, markets, customers, suppliers, and etc. These are issues that we are supposed to let the market decide on. So we always remind participants at our meetings to avoid discussions that tend toward collective agreement or collusion on these issues. I have looked at the agenda for this webinar and the presentations, and I do not think that we have a concern, especially when we look at those things. But we are still going to have discussions, and we might have a question and answer session. So it's important to remember that this meeting should also be conducted in full compliance with competition law. I look forward to a fruitful discussion, and I believe that this webinar is timely for our industry at this time. Thank you very much, and I will be around in case there are any questions or clarifications needed. Back to you, Stuart. Thank you.
Thank you, Fordham. And next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to launch some poll questions now, 2 to start with. The first one is about who is our audience. Can we launch that one, Victoria? So if you'd like to go to the poll selection and choose the answer there, that'd be great. It's just collecting some information. We'll wait a few seconds until we can see a number of people participating, a decent number of people participating, then we close the poll and move on to the next one. And looking at the registrations we had a good selection of across the broad range of the community, so I would hope there's a fairly even distribution.
Stuart, people are still voting, so I'm leaving it open for a while.
Okay, no problem.
I see the numbers increasing.
And everybody, for your information, we've got 4 polls throughout this webinar. We're trying to make it as interactive as we can. Of course, we've got the Q&A at the end. So start thinking about some questions as we go through the presentations. It'd be great to interact. Okay, so the results of the first poll. Just move my box out of the way. 41% pilots, 18% from operators, 15% from authorities, international organizations 12%, and ATOs, etc., 14%. That's great. Thank you. And our next poll.
Give me a few seconds.
No problem.
I'll go to this next one. Okay. Let me see. You see it now on the screen? No? Okay.
Not yet.
No.
The wonders of IT. Don't worry.
So launch.
There we go. So if you're a pilot, which license, it should say which license do you hold? Select one of the selection there, ATPL, CPL, MPL, instructor, examiner, check pilot. And looking at the previous question, there should be quite a few in there, I'd imagine, evenly distributed.
People are still voting, so I'm giving a few more seconds.
Of course, some people are going to be several of those, I'd imagine, but maybe select the highest category one. Might be a good thing to do.
Okay, so we've stopped receiving. So I'll close the poll. Nope, hold on. Another vote. Close. Okay. Share.
Okay. So 42% have got an ATPL, 9% CPL, 2% MPL, instructors 15%, 32% examiners and check pilots. Well done. Thank you for completing that. And back to the presentation, please.
Yep. Oh, give me a few seconds. Okay.
Okay, so we thank you for completing those polls. It's great. We've got 2 more to go before we get through the agenda today. So I'm going to introduce the first panelist. It's Gerda Pachachka. She's the Technical Officer for Personal Licensing at ICAO. And Gerda joined ICAO on the 1st of April 2019 as Technical Officer. And a little bit of background, before joining ICAO, Gerda was a senior expert for aircrew licensing at IATA, the European Union Aviation Safety Agency. Before that, she held a position as manager for personal licensing at the National Aviation Authority of Austria. She gained industry experience while working as a licensing expert for the Swiss International Airlines in the Flight Operations Department and in the training organization of Crossair in Switzerland. She holds a private license for airplanes. And during this webinar, Gerda will provide an overview of ICAO, how ICAO supports the states with alleviation measures and recommendations on how organizations can support individuals to maintain their performance and health level when preparing for return to normal operations. So next slide, please. Looking forward to your presentation, Gerda. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I just have to share my screen, so bear with me for a second. So, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Gerda Pachachka. Let me welcome you to this webinar on challenges on managing pilot training and licensing during COVID-19. Because of this pandemic, aviation is facing extremely challenging times. And having this in mind, we have set the objectives for this webinar to inform, guide, support, and encourage stakeholders by highlighting the measures we have taken for personal licensing. Today, I'm going to look at together with you, at the roles that ICAO plays, that states play, that operators play, that pilots play, and how we support each other in this very complex system. So I start with ICAO to briefly explain who we are. In a nutshell, we are the aviation branch of the United Nations. We have 193 contracting states. Our headquarters are in Montreal, Canada. We have 7 regional offices. We are governed by the Chicago Convention and its 19 annexes. So our 7 regional offices establish the direct contact with our contracting states in these 7 regions. This is just an overview to show you where they are. And this organization, of course, was solicited for help. But how can we help now? So the first thing we did, we went to our books. So we looked at the Chicago Convention obligations concerning personal licensing. And there are these 4 articles. And what do they say in a nutshell? They say every pilot has to hold a valid license issued in accordance with the convention and Annex 1. If a license does not comply with the convention and Annex 1, the differences have to be shown on the license or in an attachment and notified to ICAO. And then this is important. Other states have the possibility not to accept such a license in international air transport. So what we did, we summed that up in a state letter, informed and reminded all contracting states about these requirements, and provided them immediately with the possibility to notify in a standardized way to ICAO these differences and to enable other states to accept these differences. So how we did that, I will explain further during this presentation. So what were the issues? There was everything that went with physical distancing consequences. States have immediately started to provide solutions to the industry. And ICAO has supported states. But what does that mean for a license holder? So physical distancing, first of all, meant that public administration access became almost impossible. FSTD access became impossible because of travel restrictions. Aeromedical services were closed, so no possibility to get a medical assessment. But also those pilots who were able to fly couldn't because there were many, many airports closed and still are. Furthermore, air traffic control services reduced. So ICAO provided solutions for states. So we enabled states' alleviation measures, and we prepared and launched a specific website. And there I would kindly ask Victoria to put that link on the chat so everybody can copy it out of the chat if you're interested to look at it. So all state alleviation measures and all guidance material for states to use for these alleviation measures is gathered there. So what does that mean for the pilot? There are numerous exemptions in place for the validity of licenses, medical certificates, for language proficiency assessments, but also on the operational side for current training and recency. All these exemptions have an end date. ICAO has determined an end date of the 31st of March 2021. Why have we done that? The pandemic is taking a wave movement around the world. There are countries who come out already, where normal operations have started already again, such as China, for example, or Europe, where the traffic is taking up slowly, but taking up. Other states are in a different phase of the pandemic. They start to close down right now. And therefore, we, for the beginning, have determined an end date of all worldwide exemptions with the 31st of March 2021, keeping in mind that maybe we will have to revisit that. But what does that also mean for pilots? Every pilot feels it now. Is my job still secure? Many of you might already have lost their job. Other consequences that pilots face are downgrading, a forced fleet change from a larger aircraft to a smaller aircraft. We have seen line pilots who were laid off asking to become an instructor again, so at least to stay in the business. And last but not least, change in operations. This is also a very important issue for pilots who fly now. And the list should be much longer, I'm aware of that. So ICAO has established guidance material. How have we done that? We have listened to what states told and stakeholders told us. We asked for help by state subject matter experts, and we harmonized like that a guidance material so to enhance safety. The parties involved in this process had the following role. First of all, there was ICAO headquarters to provide guidance, to harmonize. ICAO regional offices, which are in direct contact with the states in their region, encouraged and supported contracting states to use this guidance material, which they did to a very large extent. And service providers were encouraged by contracting states to implement mitigation measures. And these mitigation measures, they support individuals. We have created a safety net through a trust framework. So we came up with the safety management system specific doc, the ICAO handbook for competent authorities on the management of aviation safety risks related to COVID-19. We always have, during the whole process, considered human performance issues. But we also think of the future. We require an aviation implementation feedback loop and monitoring. The expected results of these exercises were that states apply exemptions and notify them to keep the industry going, and that states accept exemptions from others. We expect that organizations apply mitigation measures and that individual license holders show high level of personal responsibility. So how do we do that? ICAO builds trust in states' measures. And we do that by establishing a harmonized approach for exemptions. And when we say harmonized, we encourage all states to use the same guidance material, and like that, one state can trust the other. For this, we prepared a specific flowchart for states to establish exemptions. For specific standards, we have provided quick reference guides, including mitigation measures. And we have provided a form where all exemptions are notified. And there's something really, really extraordinary has happened, and I was part of the two organizations that cooperated so tremendously well in this. IATA stepped in and started to use these notified exemptions in a specific program. And this specific program you can reach via a link in the CCRD section of the web page, where we have provided the link to you in the chat. And IATA has taken the CCRD information, created a little program which allows a very quick overview on where exemptions are in place and where exemptions are accepted from other states. So this is very, very helpful, and I'm very happy to be able to report about this great cooperation with IATA. For a legal perspective, please be aware ICAO does not take responsibility for this application. The real information, the reliable information you would find on our website, but for a quick overview, this is a great program. And thank you, IATA, for that. So I said before, ICAO builds trust in states, and states build trust in organizations. How do they do that? They establish mitigation measures for exemptions. The acceptance will require a different safety net. This everybody in the game has to accept. The feedback loop has to be followed, therefore, and monitoring is important. Organizations have the obligation to build trust in the individuals who work for them. And they have to support them to maintain their performance level with other ways. They have to support them to enhance self-confidence and to reinforce stress resilience. Aviation has built a code of mail for everybody. And I have heard many, many pilots say, oh my God, that's too much, it's too heavy. But on the other hand, once we have passed our checks and passed our medical assessment, we walk proud and self-confident through the air. We are really sure, as somebody else has determined, that my performance standard is good, and the doctor has said I am healthy and fit to perform my flight. This helps us. So the support for this code of mail is to be found in the Chicago Convention and in the SARPs and guidance material. Alleviation measures that we establish now are following up on this code of mail and make sure that it's good. But we have to monitor, because what if? What if this happens? So fitness for duty and physical and mental health are very important. Responsibilities of the individual, the service providers, and the regulators. So we are all together in this, because cumulative alleviation measures have to be considered as an additional risk. And we should keep in mind that the low density of traffic has also led to a low probability of incidents to happen, but that will change as soon as the traffic goes up, and there are many reasons for that. So what can the individual pilot do to keep the performance level up, to make sure that the self-confidence is at where it should be, that the stress resilience is kept up, and fitness for duty is respected? So first of all, the big organizations, IATA, IFALPA, EIOPA, and authorities have established a lot of alternative means of doing that. Make use of it, but also refresh knowledge through books, online courses. Use simulation in whatever form available. If you cannot access the simulator, use something else. There are lots of simulation devices available that you might not have thought of before. And sometimes the answer may come in the caring voice of a friend. Contact the training organization, instructors, and network with other pilots. So actually there's a lot the individual pilot can do. So what have I told you today? I've spoken about the ICAO, its role, the convention, and the 193 states. There is a specific webpage online, the COVID-19 Safety Operational Measures website. You have the link in the chat. There is ICAO building and actively working on a trust framework between ICAO, states, operators, and individual stakeholders. Because when we return to normal operations, we have to make sure that the performance level, the self-confidence, the stress resilience are up, and fitness for duty is in all our minds. Because in a code of mail, every link counts. We want to see a shiny code of mail. So before I go, my respects and thanks go to those people who have helped me to set up this presentation. It's the state safe subject matter experts from the personal training and licensing group for their ideas. It's ICAO colleagues from the SMS human factors and medical section for their input, colleagues who provided editorial and technical support, and last but not least, Stuart Fox for moderating. And now back to you, Stuart.
Thank you, Gerda. Great, and that link's been put in the chat function so that everybody can have a look at that. I'm pleased to say there's 178 states that I noticed this morning that have filed their COVID-19 related differences. So that's good news. Good initiative, Gerda, thank you. We're now going to have, before we move on to the next panelist, a quick poll. So next slide, please. And can we launch the third poll, Victoria?
Yes, Stuart, just give me a few seconds.
No problem.
Okay.
Just while we're waiting, I can talk about the CCRD system. It's very useful for states to have a look at. So I do urge you to go and have a look at that system. Been very, very successful, but also for operators to see what states will accept the alleviation measures. So the poll's up on the screen now, it's great. So the question is, how many aircraft were flying at the end of 2019? Please click one of those selections.
people are still voting, so I'm keeping it open for a while.
Great. How's it going?
Yeah, we're doing well, but people are still voting.
Sure, some people have an educated guess.
Yep. Okay. Oh, still a few more votes. Oh, just bear with us for a few seconds more. Okay, so I think we can close it now just to have a view, and let me share the results with you.
Okay. So about 30,000 is the correct answer, I've got to say. Well done. And
Good.
just for information, 30,000 was the approximate answer. Roughly 3,000 of those were parked up for whatever reason, seasonal use, etc., at the end of 2019. So great. And back to the presentation, please, Victoria.
Okay. Yep.
So
Second.
just great. So I introduced Glenn Finch. Glenn serves as the Vice Chair, Training and Licensing on the IFALPA Human Performance Committee. He's a Canadian member of the Airline Pilots Association International, ALPA, an active line pilot on the CRJ aircraft for Jazz Aviation, Air Canada's largest regional partner. Glenn has been continuously involved in industry and professional pilot association work since 1992 at his airline, as well as national and international level. He previously served as an ALPA International Director, Pilot Training Programs, and Chair of the ALPA International National Training Council. More recently, he's been also represented IFALPA at the ICAO Competency-Based Training and Assessment Task Force, CBTA, and the ICAO Next Generation Aviation Professionals Task Force, NGAP, and IATA Pilot Training Task Force. Glenn will now present from an operator's perspective the challenges operators are facing as they return to some form of normal operation. And over to you, Glenn. Looking forward to it.
Thanks very much, Stuart. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone, wherever you may be. Our focus today is to talk about some of the challenges that are faced in the return to normal operations or towards normal operations. Globally, we're starting to see our airlines beginning to resume operations. Those operations may have been severely curtailed or even stopped for an extended period of time. From the training perspective, we have training departments that have been forced to operate under very strong restrictions, such as closed facilities or being unable to travel pilots for the required training. We all know this is something our industry's never experienced. As a result, I think everyone is looking for the solutions to the variety of problems that we're facing. We're going to present this primarily from the perspective of the pilot, but it's important to remember that all stakeholders play a very important role. And without a cooperative effort between the stakeholders, we may not see the efficient and successful return to operations that we all need. So a little bit about IFALPA for those of you who are not familiar with us. IFALPA was formed in 1948 in order to provide a common global voice for pilots and as a means to allow pilots to interact with the international aviation community through ICAO. From this initial start, we continue to work very closely with ICAO, and we maintain an office and have a representative assigned to ICAO full-time. We also work very closely with IATA. With respect to the pilot training issues, IATA has given IFALPA an opportunity to work with them as an observer member of their pilot training task force. Our membership consists of member associations representing the pilots of each country represented. We currently represent over 100,000 pilots in nearly 100 countries. Most of our work is done by a group of volunteers from our member associations. Everyone is very dedicated to improving aviation safety. Our professional staff work alongside our volunteers from the headquarters in Montreal. The overriding principle for a safe and efficient return to operations is that all pilots must be qualified, proficient, and confident. As pilots, it's important we understand the challenges that are being faced by our regulators and by our airlines, and we must be prepared to work together. The role of the pilot is critical to the success of training. And it's also critical to allow our operators to see a successful and efficient return to normal operations. Quite simply, pilots are an important part of the solution. Everyone has a role to play in ensuring that our pilots are qualified, proficient, and confident. The regulator will establish the standards and regulations that are required to qualify the pilot and ensure that the pilot is properly trained and checked to meet the legal requirements to operate safely as a crew member. The operator and the pilot share responsibility to ensure that the qualified pilot is proficient to the standard that may be expected by the airline. By proficient, what I mean is that the pilot's knowledge and skills are consistently at a very high level that would be required of an airline pilot. Finally, the individual pilot must be confident that they can complete their assigned flight duties safely. Pilots must start by having confidence that their individual training and proficiency needs will be taken seriously and will be addressed by their airline. And the individual pilots should be able to determine their individual level of confidence. So keep these in mind as we go through: qualified, proficient, and confident. Each situation is different and unique. We can group the training and qualification issues into 5 major areas of concern: training planning, curriculum, training delivery, transition to line operations. And around all of those is managing regulator extensions, exemptions, and then the transition to the normal training situation. As I noted earlier, since the 3 primary stakeholders share responsibility, each of these issues must be addressed from the perspective of the regulator, from the operator, and from the pilot. Overriding all of these facts is that we're managing a very unique situation, often by applying temporary regulatory or policy relief in the training environment. All the stakeholders must be cognizant of this and must manage the temporary relief responsibly, while remembering that there will be a return to normal or standard training and checking. In many cases, we're looking at very unusual situations that don't necessarily fit into the standard setting. For example, we'll see pilots who are qualified and current and have had little or no break in operational flying. We'll see pilots that are qualified and current, but have had an extended break in operational flying. We'll see pilots that are current, qualified, as I just mentioned, but operating under regulatory exemptions or extensions that need to be managed. We'll see loss of recency, for example, the 3 takeoffs and landings in 90 days. And finally, we'll also see a loss of qualification that would require training and checking to requalify the pilot. For example, a loss of qualification for less than 6 months, or as things slowly come back to normal, we may see situations where there's a loss of qualification for a pilot that's more than 6 months or more. Since each situation is unique, it's difficult to propose a one-size-fits-all solution. Between states or operators, that's impossible. So we encourage flexibility in the design and the delivery of training. The key is that a cooperative approach to flexibility does not mean the elimination of training or shortcuts. Flexibility might simply mean finding a more efficient way of completing the same training. This is also not the time to transition to a new way of doing things. Use past experience and utilize known training methods and curricula, then modify that training as needed to the situation. As we transition to the returning to normal operations, we must ensure that our pilots are ready to enter training and are prepared for training. We encourage all pilots to maintain a disciplined approach to self-study in order to maintain their knowledge to a high level. To facilitate this self-study, airlines should support their pilots by providing self-study materials such as distributed learning materials or access to the computer-based training materials provided by the airline. We understand that there will be an increased burden on the airline's training department, but it's critical that training is not rushed and that the quality is never compromised. Remember too that some of our examiners, our instructors or check pilots may be affected by lapsed qualifications or may be working under exemptions or extensions. These situations must be managed properly to ensure that any training and checking is completed as legal and valid. With respect to curriculum delivered during training, as mentioned earlier, one size does not fit all. We encourage flexibility in a curriculum design. However, wherever possible, training curricula should be modified from the existing or established material. The emphasis must be on training as opposed to checking, and must include both a predetermined number of hours or training periods, as well as established standards of competency or proficiency. Pilots are individuals, and even within our pilot groups, there are specific needs of that individuals may have. When planning and developing training, there should be an allowance for extra time to allow pilot requested practice of maneuvers or items that may be unique to the individual. Training should be delivered in a full crew environment with pilots occupying their normally assigned duty position. The training must be delivered by an instructor who's properly trained and qualified for the task. Wherever possible, these should be the operator's own instructors. There should be an opportunity in the training for pilots to practice manual handling skills in multiple scenarios. There's recently been some discussion on the use of airplanes to conduct training that would normally be conducted in simulators. We're adamantly opposed to this. Now, this is not to address regular training that would normally be done on airplanes, such as base training or line checks. This only applies to training that would normally be conducted in simulators. The degradation in safety and the reduced quality of training is quite simply unacceptable. So simulators and other FSTDs are wonderful training tools. Everyone will agree to that. However, remembering that some pilots have been out of the cockpit for an extended period of time, maybe longer than they've ever been away from the flight deck in their entire career. We must ensure that these training devices are utilized to support. Okay, we're just getting some transitions there that are not normal here. We must ensure that the training devices are utilized to support the pilot in the most effective way possible. Now is not the time to reduce device levels of simulators out of convenience. Our pilots must have their training delivered in the best simulators that are available. There should be no waivers allowed for any reduction to the training device requirements. This includes the motion for all refresher training. As we talk about the transition to line operations, we need to remember that many pilots have been away from the flight deck for an extended period of time. As I said earlier, sometimes this may be the longest break from the cockpit that they've had in their entire career. From an operational perspective, we believe that safety is paramount, and that when we initially return pilots to operational status after a period of time away, we must manage the risk the best way we can. To do that, we believe that returning pilots should initially be rostered with a training pilot or an examiner. If a line check is required, those pilots requiring the line check should have an opportunity to complete some flying before that check happens. A minimum of 2 supervised sectors should be conducted prior to the line check. Recent experience has shown that pilots must be prepared. The message to pilots is to ensure that they are properly prepared both operationally and mentally. The current situation is very fluid. It's changing rapidly in many ways. Our pilots must be prepared to adapt. Pilots have received the training they need to operate the airplane effectively and safely in normal, abnormal, and emergency situations. However, in the dynamic operational situations that are occurring now, our pilots must be very skilled at managing the entire operation. The airlines play a very important role in providing pilots with valid and relevant information to allow them to manage that operation successfully. It's a constantly changing situation, and we will certainly gain a deeper understanding with time and experience. This is yet another situation where a cooperative effort between the airline, the operator, as well as the regulator and the pilots, critical to success. Next slide. It sometimes seems like the situation will never end. We know that. And at some point, we will transition to our normal training and checking process. All the temporary measures must include an identified endpoint. As Gerda mentioned earlier, the 31st of March, 2021 is the current date target. That may change. And we would also hope that the return point may have some other definition. Ultimately, the goal is to return to the normal and standard training plan. We strongly believe that we should not see temporary measures become permanent changes. If there are some measures that are considered to be an improvement, a proper process must be followed, including consultation and a proper assessment prior to being submitted for approval. We do not want to see change for the sake of convenience or change for the sake of change alone. I think we can all agree the last few months have certainly been challenging on a professional level as well as on a personal level. Many of our pilots are experiencing challenges and facing futures that they certainly did not expect. We found that a very well-designed and supported peer support program is vital to support pilots who may be going through personal and professional challenges. These programs are managed by specially trained fellow pilots or peers. They have a long track record of success. IFALPA, along with our member associations, is very supportive of pilot assistance programs, and we strongly encourage both the airlines and the regulators to understand the peer support process, to trust the programs, and to work cooperatively with the support pilots. So finally, our IFALPA Human Performance Committee has recently published a position paper on the subject of training for return to normal operations. Position paper was developed by representatives of our member associations globally, and it's a look at the issue from a global perspective as best we can. Position paper is available on our IFALPA website at ifalpa.org. Thanks.
Hello, thanks, Glenn. So I'd like to apologise about the quality of the audio. There's a little bit of an issue there. It seems to be a bit better now. Hopefully everybody can hear the panelists okay. So we're going to have a quick poll before the next presenter. So Victoria, could you start the next poll? I think this one is on parked aircraft, isn't it?
Yes, let me get the poll. So I will launch the poll now.
So the question is, how many aircraft were parked at the end of April 2020? Please select one of the selections there. So we're going to wait till enough people have responded and that sort of responses for completing it have reduced, then we're going to close it.
Yes, Stuart, the question, the answers are. So answers are still coming.
Okay. So just while that's happening, we noted there's 30,000 aircraft were in service at the end of 2019. That includes all types of jets, turboprops, etc., carrying 4.3 billion passengers. And the stats we're showing today, a lot of it's collated by Flight Radar 24, who map using ADS-B flights tracked. 2019, 69 million flights, new record, averaging 189,000 flights per day. Incredible, isn't it?
Okay, so Stuart, I'm going to close the poll and show the results.
Okay.
I'm going to share them now.
Okay, so the popular response is 15,000. In fact, it was 18,000 was, sorry, 57%. So it's actually the correct answer. Great. So 18,000, yes. And the next months in May, that reduced by about 2,000 as operators started putting the aircraft back into service. So thank you for participating in that poll. And next slide, please.
Okay, hold on a moment. So these were the two polls. And now I'm going to close this.
Great. So I'll now introduce the next panelist, Captain Jan René, who is the head of training licensing with Safety and Flight Operations Division at IATA headquarters in Montreal. He joined IATA in June 2016 after 26 years of commercial air carrier experience, which included both domestic and international operations. Jan is the secretary of the IATA Pilot Training Task Force and consequently is in charge of several major training initiatives, including competency-based training assessment, implementation, support, and evidence-based training data report update. Those projects employ captains' active contribution to ICAO and EASA new pilot standard design. During his 26 years as commercial air carrier, experience, he has held various positions, which include Chief Pilot Compliance and Regulatory Affairs, Flight Standards Management Pilot, Line Training Captain, and Type Rating Instructor and Examiner. So over to you, Jan, for the IATA perspective on the COVID-19 issues.
Stuart, if I may, so please, if any panelist has the microphone open, there are some noises, so we'll all turn off our phones and leave only Jan's microphone open. So Jan, I'm going to give you control now of the.
Thank you.
Okay. So thank you, Stuart. Do you hear me properly? And do I have control, Victoria? I think yes. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. You are very numerous on this webinar. Thank you for joining us. Oops, sorry. The sensitivity of the computer, the remote computer control. So Gerda and Glenn introduced ICAO and IFALPA, so I cannot resist to remind you that IATA stands for the International Air Transport Association. And our goal is to support the industry by providing global standards for safety, security, efficiency, and sustainability. What you see on the screen is our motto. And this motto has been, let's say, well demonstrated during the COVID period than ever. In IATA, we represent 290 members. We're coming from 120 countries, and we have offices all across the world, 50 offices in total. And our headquarters is in Montreal, close to ICAO and IFALPA headquarters. So, as an introduction for this slide, I would like to remind you that from an operator perspective, all the operational personnel must be trained and competent to perform their duties in operations. And among this operational personnel, we have pilots, obviously. We are speaking about pilots this morning, but we also have maintenance personnel, cabin crew, dispatchers that are also license holders. And those personnel comply to additional regulatory requirements, and that are, let's say, come additionally to the operator training. So in a nutshell, what I want to say is the training delivered by an operator is performed under a very regulated and controlled environment. And from our perspective, beyond the pilots, we are considering all kinds of operational personnel, and also, all kinds of operational personnel. And that's it. Excuse me, I got a message on my computer. I am confused. So Gerda and Glenn have expressed the problematic that the industry encountered during the COVID, closure of the training facilities, license revalidation process disturbed in some states, and so on. So the first IATA role has been to advocate for license validity and operator training validity extension. This has been done very early in March, and we have seen in mid-March regulators setting specific meetings in order to provide alternative standards to the traditional training and licensing standard. If we speak about Montreal, we are speaking about ICAO in particular, and ICAO has set up additional flight tops panel meetings in order to define harmonized alternative standards that would be acceptable in regards of the allegation. So the third step is, for us in IATA, we produce a lot of guidance, and for us, we have produced a guidance to support operator training organizations to help them to draft the safety case that is sustaining the request of any allegation. If you click after this webinar, the link that is into the yellow rectangle, you will have access to all the documentation that I will present during this webinar. If we go into the details, this is our guidance. The guidance has been published on the 22nd of May. And this is a compendium of all the documentation we have produced, let's say, from end of March up to mid of May. This guidance is totally aligned with ICAO initiatives, and I am thinking about the ICAO CART, Council Aviation Recovery Task Force, and most specifically to the ICAO takeoff guidance for the restart of the operation. So this guide has two goals. First, to propose tactical measures, the ones that have been necessary from March to now, and also medium and long-term solutions to permit manage at its best the pilot training during the COVID period. So the guide has 3 sections, and I will elaborate the 3 sections with the next slide. Oops. Okay. I'm a little bit slow, sorry, but the remote control is is a little bit tricky sometimes. So the first section is related to a general guidance about the safety risk assessment. When an organization, operator, ITO is asking an allegation, it must be sustained by a safety case. And in our case, we propose a generic one with specific mitigation measures and also new controls that could be in place when the organization is seeking for the approval of any evaluation. We remained, let's say, at a high level with ICAO standards related to the training program and the recent experience. So, practical example for the recent experience, the 3 takeoff and landings in the last 3 months. We propose additional mitigations such as reducing the operating limitation. If one pilot doesn't comply with the 3 and 3, he has less. We say, okay, we can reduce the crosswind as an example. And in terms of new control, the flight crew composition can be adapted. If one pilot is missing some recent experience, the other one could be, let's say, instructor with the recent experience requirement. So a generic safety risk assessment to support the industry. The second section is related to practical example to illustrate the first section. So first illustration, and this is the first one that has been needed, sorry, it is to establish a virtual classroom when the training centers or the training departments were closed. So at this level, we provide technical guidance to ensure that the quality of the training delivered in distance learning via virtual classroom is maintained. The second illustration comes from our colleague from Emirates. Emirates had the need for the Airbus 380 fleet to perform line check in a simulated mode for the obvious reason that has been introduced with the pools, because this fleet has been heavily grounded. So thank you for our colleagues from Emirates, because I know that the illustration has been, let's say, a source of inspiration to other operators. The last example is from our colleague from Air Canada, the need to perform some simulators, because we have discovered during the COVID that some regulators are putting additional layers compared to the ICAO requirements, and the Canadian regulation mandates on top of the 3 takeoff and landings to have 1 sector in a real flight to be compliant with the recent experience requirements. So those examples have been positively received by the industry, and the virtual classroom typically has been accepted as an alternative mean of compliance by some regulators. The last section of the guide is related to first best practice, sanitization. So it's not stratospheric. We are speaking sanitization measures in the context of a training department in an airline or at the training organization level. The second bullet is related to what we have called the CBTA refresher session. This is for us a very important point to promote competency-based training and assessment. So this CBTA session focus on specific competencies. We put special emphasis during the training session to ensure that the pilots are competent for the return to operations and also confident. The confidence is supported by the quality of the training program that I am mentioning, and also by the competence of the instructor delivering the instruction that is continuously developing the competency of the pilot. And for us, this combination competence plus confidence should permit to reach our main goal to have resilient pilots for the restart of the to be able to adapt to any adverse event in operation. The last bullet is related to operator and training organization partnership. This is for us a more long-term solution that we want to promote, to have a very consistent approach from selection, initial training, and operator training. In IATA, we call that for years the total system approach. It is new, but now we are, let's say, at the beginning of the CBTA expansion, and it is very important that all the stakeholders are aligned, speak the same language, and implement properly competency-based training and assessment. So this is more or less a very quick summary about the guide. And the guide has been possible with the support of the IATA Pilot Training Task Force. You have heard this acronym several times. So in IATA, we are an association. To maintain our relevance and to be able to represent, lead, and serve our members, we have a very robust committee working group structure. And for pilot training, we are speaking about the Pilot Training Task Force. So we have approximately 15 members. Representation is more or less 10 to 12 airlines. We also have Glenn, you see him on the picture, IFALPA then. We also have 2 OEMs, Airbus, Boeing, and training organizations represented. So this group, for me, in my eyes, is the only international group that is able to provide this kind of expertise so broadly. So thank you to the task force for their ongoing support for all the work that has been done during COVID. In the past, the task force exists since 2014. I will go very quickly. Nevertheless, you must know that the task force has produced several guidance. 2015, the guidance for UPRT. 2016 for flight crew monitoring enhancement. 2017-18, the guidance instructor and evaluator. This is the first competency-based approach for the instructor training. And I want to stress that this guide has been written by several regulators. It's part of the next ICAO amendments. It is in the pipeline at EASA, so this work has been recognized. Very recently, last year, we have updated our pilot testing to introduce the ability of the applicant to develop the pilot competencies. And very recently, the common training that is totally CBTA oriented. If you are totally lost and you want to find all the documentation, you just have to click to those 2 links and you find the link. You find in the yellow rectangle the guidance for the COVID and our guidance in the blue rectangle from MPL, EBT, pilot selection, and all our guidance. So now you have seen the guide. We are now in the middle of the summer. And we have identified that we are facing some challenges because now for the last 3 months, pilots have been exposed to a limited amount of training, limited exposure to operations, and now we need to go back to operation and to restart the system. And we have identified that most of the NAAs, they have drafted the allegations. They have supported the allegations. This is not the problem. They have supported the allegations, but they have put a specific date. And in general, date that you see day, month, year, is placed in the middle of the summer. So if you put such a drafting in your allegations, in fact, you have 2 pilot populations, the extended one and the non-extended one. And the date I am mentioning, generally speaking, I speak for EASA and FAA, is arriving on the 31. And the fact to have those 2 populations, the extended population will arrive at the same time compared to the non-extended population back into the training session. So for our members, we are speaking about multiplied by 2 the volume of training on the 1st of August. And this is a challenge for several members. So what could be the solution to avoid to put a specific date of applicability to a specific targeted population, and to stick with the ICAO recommendation that allegations are possible up to the 31 of March next year. If the allegations are drafted this way, you have a global shift on the right that is totally convenient for most of the organizations, because you just have to go back to your approved training program. You just have this shift by a few months. And when we think about EBT, ATQP, and AQP programs, this is the most, let's say, efficient way to have the less disruption. So this solution will be proposed to ICAO very soon at FlightOps panel. Now, what do we have in our, let's say, line of horizon in the medium and long term? IATA will be committed to provide webinars for the different topics, but in our case, for pilots, and in particular to promote CBTA and provide an awareness. I have received plenty of requests from the regions, so I have not formalized dates as per today, but I hope that the first CBTA webinar happen north by the end of July, and other regions will have the same kind of webinar. The second point, you have understood that CBTA is a strategic goal for us, and beyond the guide we provide, IATA provide as well a practical support. And in that case, I want to mention that we collaborate with different organizations, but in particular with Airbus, to provide a practical support for operators to implement CBTA/EBT, evidence-based training, to operators. Next week, let's say the arrangement should be between Airbus and IATA should be formal. The next technical topic that is in line with the CBTA competency-based training and assessment implementation is how to manage the training data. Training data, as per today, is not totally harmonized. We need to work on it. And with the support of the PTTF, we have two goals. First, to design new standards to collect this training data and perform the analysis. And second, to assess and provide guidance on what could be the role of advanced technology in training to support training in general, but CBTA in particular. So this is what we have in our radar. And the last point, if the click works well, sorry, I just wanted to, sorry. I am done. I just wanted to mention that IATA is providing practical support. For us, it is a product. This is a consultancy department who is managing the commercial aspect. Nevertheless, what you see on the screen is the EBT instructor module that we are delivering since last September 2019. And we have delivered this service to different operators with a positive feedback. So just to provide awareness that IATA on the book, we provide practical implementation support. And now I am reaching my last slide. Excuse me. And I thank you for listening to me. I hope I maintain the time. I have been a little bit long. I'm sorry. Thank you, everyone. Over to you, Stuart.
Kian. So we're getting up to the the end of the session. But before we do that, I'd just like to recap on what we've gone through so far before we go into
Stuart,
questions.
hold on a moment, please, because I think that the PowerPoint was shut down.
Okay.
So I have to reopen it.
Okay, well, I'll talk in the meantime. So I'm just going to recap on what's been discussed so far from my perspective. We've heard from 3 panelists from ICAO, IFALPA, IATA's role and support during COVID-19. We all have a role to play to ensure pilots are qualified, proficient and confident for safe and efficient return to operations. We've heard about solutions provided by ICAO to enable states to implement alleviation measures and the need for harmonized process for exemptions. We've heard from Glenn saying that each situation is unique and it is difficult to propose a one-size-fits-all solution. That is why flexibility in the design and delivery of training is encouraged. The emphasis must be on training as opposed to checking, and training should be planned to allow extra time for pilot requested practice. We also heard about pilots' own responsibility to maintain disciplined approach to self-study. Jan spoke on the risk assessment associated with regulatory alleviations and best practices for the operational special conditions mitigating the identified risks. He also spoke about the stacking effect in training, how this could be mitigated. IATA supports the implementation of competency-based training and assessment, CBTA, and is working on the design of new standards for training data collection and analysis. Throughout the presentations on performance, it's important to have performance, self-confidence, stress, resilience, and fitness for duty has all been discussed during these presentations. It's now over to the Q&A session, so please use that facility. And next slide, please. So we've had a number of questions come in and we don't have a huge amount of time. So I'm going to choose the ones I think are really quite important. And if the panelists would like to put their cameras on, that'd probably be a good idea. And microphones ready. So we've got a question here from one of the attendees, and that is really probably typical one, I think, at the moment. What are the recommendations for the MPL program, especially for those who have not unlocked their frozen ATPL and their existing MPL tagged to a particular fleet or airline? I've heard this one crop up in the past. Maybe, Jan, do you want to comment on this one? But I'm open to any of the panelists. So it's basically a possibility of a pilot who's followed an MPL program and then finds he's not got any flying to do because the operator's laid off pilots, etc. I think is the issue there.
So I have to confess, I didn't receive direct, let's say, since the COVID. I received some questions on how to find, let's say, a solution to change the aircraft type in the middle of the MPL. So
okay.
It seems that if you can, let's say, explain the situation to your authority and you can get this kind of, let's say, move. Typical example, you are expected to fly a 777, but in the middle, your course you need to change. It's not the classic pattern, well understood. Nevertheless, some bridges seems to be possible if the training organization / operator manage the situations with the regulator. This is my, let's say, blunt answer. I do not maybe give all the details because I don't have all the details about the regulatory work to be done.
Sure. Thanks, Jan. Gerda?
It depends a lot on the state where the school is in, and actually this is a situation that was already known before COVID-19. For example, in the European context, we had very strict requirements that went beyond ICAO requirements. There was this very rigid binding to one operator. and it was even difficult to change within the group of operators, so within Lufthansa Group, for example. So what I recommend to those affected stakeholders, please contact your competent authority, your licensing authority, and they will be able to provide solutions for that.
Okay, great. There's a general couple of queries about information presented during the seminar. I think it's all going to be provided, isn't that right, Victoria? So links particularly to websites.
Yes, well, they are in the presentation, but I can put them also in the chat. I put ICAO's link in the chat box, but I can send it also to the others, but they will receive everything.
Okay, and there's another one here, which is an interesting one. The end date decided by ICAO is the 31st of March 2021, but different by all regulated bodies. It is because the regulatory bodies can decide within the frame of March 2021 what the respective end date should be. Do you think it's do you think March 2021 is realistic, Gerda?
For the time being, we have not talked about changing this date, so it seems to be realistic. What has come up during the last weeks, discussions on mitigation measures that we considered necessary in the beginning to find solutions for pilots who could not access the FSTD or the medical assessor. But what turns out now, and Jan has started to speak about it, is that we get a backlog of training, a backlog of medical assessments and examinations, and to be able to work on this backlog, we are creating a bow-wave, and to be able to work on it, we will need further exemptions. So we are aware of it, we monitor it, and we encourage states to monitor it. So for the time being, 31st of March is still valid, and we have not started to discuss to push this back.
Sure, and I guess ICAO would monitor the system, wouldn't they, to see what alleviations are still in there, and if they end up going past March 2021, there may be a consideration to extend the date, I guess. Is that right?
We will, of course, look at it much
Monitor it.
than 31st of March. We will probably start to discuss that in winter. Sure.
That also relates to, I guess, a number of questions have been put in the system. Do you think these exemption mechanisms are enough? So I guess it's related to second waves possibility. So what do you think to that, Glenn? Do you think this the system that's been set up at the moment is adequate to cope with the situation as it emerges going forward?
I think the current flexibility that's built into the system, as Gerda mentioned, there may be an opportunity to extend alleviations. We need to monitor that. Again, this is a good example of the regulator, the operator, and the pilots all working together to effectively manage the situation. It's fluid. Things will change. Time as things progress. I think we need to monitor it very closely and be prepared to, just as we do when we fly airplanes, we need to be prepared for the unexpected, and we need to be able to manage that effectively.
Great, thank you. There's a question here on CBTA implementation. When will it be implemented? So I guess maybe Jan can take this one. Jan, how does that work? CBTA implementation.
So if we speak of the actual license and training that are purely CBTA for today, we have MPL endorsed by ICAO and EASA in 2006 at licensing level, MPL multi-crew pilot license. And we have EBT, evidence-based training, endorsed by ICAO in 2013, and EASA full baseline EBT will be released this year. So in terms of CBTA, Gerda will complement certainly. Since the amendment of constraining in 2016, we are working at ICAO level to align Annex 1 and all the related training documents to permit full implementation of CBTA. So from an ICAO perspective, the standards will be released in November 2020 this year, and a priori, all the CBTA programs are, let's say, the policies, the procedures are described, and it will be possible to implement such program in November 2020. Before giving the floor to Gerda, what I want to say is today you can already implement CBTA principle without applying the instructional system design. You have already guidance on the shelf. I am thinking the instructor evaluator guidance where we have provided for 2 years now has already been implemented in some organizations.
Great.
I guess it's me now. CBTA is considered to be a training methodology that will exist in parallel to what we have now. ICAO has decided to allow for both conventional training, but competency-based training and assessment is clearly our preferred option. When we said we go for a parallel way, so both training methodologies will be in place, we said, okay, there's a lot of good training out there, and we do not want to suddenly make that invalid. Second reason is there are countries who are not ready for CBTA. You need not only the legislation to cover that, you also need the qualified staff in the authority, and you need the qualified staff in the approved training organizations to be able to make full use of the CBTA context. So on the 5th November 2020, the Amendment 176 to Annex 1 that allows for CBTA enters into force, in the amendment to PALS training. We are right now publishing the relevant state letter to that one. There's a lot of guidance material that is coming along, but when ICAO has amended standards and recommended practices, states have to change their legislative context as well. This normally takes some time. And there's no obligation to implement it. You may and you should, as we think, but there's no obligation. We always have to also consider that states have to be able to recognize licenses that were issued following a CBTA training, and there we are still in the beginning. I have to be honest. I hope this
Thank you. Thank you. Just very quickly, again, we're just sort of running out of time, but if you don't mind.
I will be really short here. First of all, I can say that IFALPA does support the proper implementation and the proper development of CBTA. We have a position paper that's available it's available on our website for those that are interested. But I want to reiterate that our opinion right now with the COVID-19 situation and dealing with the issues we're dealing with here today, it's our opinion that we would not want to see someone developing and implementing a new way of training as a result of this COVID situation to return the pilots to operational status. We'd prefer that if we see we have an operator that's already using a competency-based scheme, whether it be EBT or other competency-based training programs, we'd like to see them continue with that, but we really don't want to see someone introducing a competency-based training system initially in a rush to simply bring back their pilots. Now is not the time for change.
Great. I think we're out of time. So any unanswered questions, we're going to complete those and we'll make those available offline. Likewise, the material we've been presented will be also made available. I thank everybody for participating, for the panelists. It's been really a worthwhile thing. Hope everybody's enjoyed it, and we look forward to the next series, I think, on the same subjects, or not same subjects, but the same overarching theme, licensing and training. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Was my pleasure.
Thank you.